Good evening. Welcome to Let's Talk Mental Health Trumbull. I'm Melissa McGarry from TPOD Trumbull's Prevention Partnership. Just in a matter of housekeeping, this is set up as a webinar, so your speaker is going to be Alicia Farrell, but if you have any questions during the program, we're going to have time for her to take those at the end, and you can put those into the Q&A box. So that would be the best place to put any questions that you may have on this topic that Alicia can help us with at the end. I'm now going to introduce our first selectman, Vicki Tesoro, so she can tell you a little bit about the program and a little bit about Dr. Farrell. You're muted.
I am. Okay. So thank you, Melissa. Appreciate the introduction and welcome everyone this evening. So it is my pleasure again to welcome you to our second installment of Let's Talk Mental Health Trumbull. I want to thank all the town organizations who have been involved in planning these sessions. Trumbull PTA Council, Trumbull EMS, Mary J. Sherlock Counseling Center, Lakewood Trumbull YMCA, Confidant Health, my friend Abby, Trumbull Community Television, and TPOD, Trumbull's Prevention Partnership. We are also recording these sessions and they will be made available on demand by Trumbull Community TV. Tonight, we're pleased to host Dr. Alicia Farrell to talk with us about the pressure to be perfect and the unintended consequences on our families. We live in an achievement-oriented culture. There's a lot of pressure on kids to excel, and this can have real impact on their well-being. In the TPOD survey, student surveys administered this school year, 49% of Trumbull High students and 35% of our 7th and 8th graders reported that academic causes them extreme stress. These same surveys also revealed that we have hundreds of kids in grades 7 through 12 who reported that in the past year, they have felt so sad or hopeless that they were unable to do their normal activities. We are very fortunate to welcome Dr. Alicia Farrell back to Trumbull to talk us through the pressure to be perfect and how we can help our kids. Dr. Farrell is an accomplished cognitive psychologist, former university professor, fellowship award recipient, published research scientist, national keynote speaker, and founder of Clearview Counseling. In her private practice, Dr. Farrell has counseled hundreds of clients on how to get back to basics to achieve their life goals and personal well-being. Her clients have ranged in age from 13 to 98. She has worked with individuals, couples, parents, families, and professionals. She also brings 10 years of corporate experience to her work. In addition to her private practice, Dr. Farrell is a gifted trainer and speaker who delivers dynamic keynotes, workshops on a wide range of topics related to personal well-being and parenting. Dr. Farrell brings 35 years of expertise and passion to her work. To learn more, visit her website at aliciafarrellphd.com. Welcome, Dr. Alicia Farrell.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. Thanks so much for taking the time to come out tonight. I'm really thrilled to be here with you. I know that I just want to take a moment and connect with all of you and let you know that this has been an unprecedented, difficult period in all of our lives over the course of the last 3 years. And I want you all to know that I understand how challenging this has been as adults and parents, and how incredibly difficult it's been on our children. And we're all coming to the table tonight feeling a little depleted. And tonight I really hope to give you some information and some guidance that's going to lighten your load a little bit and inspire you to make some changes that can make a difference in your lives. So we're gonna tackle a really provocative and complicated and confounding topic tonight. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna speak for about an hour, maybe an hour and 10 minutes, and then we're going to open everything up for questions and answers. So I encourage you, as we're moving through the presentation, if you think of something, put it in the chat or write it down for yourself so that you don't forget. And we'll get to as many of those as we can on the back end. So this topic that we're addressing tonight is, I want to present to you in the form of a question, and that is, how do we raise well-adjusted, productive, self-sufficient, independent, civil adults in a very complicated world that values performance and, as Vicki said, achievement over character? So specifically tonight, we're going to focus on 4 primary points of interest: the pressure our children are under to be perfect, the consequences of that pursuit, the benefits of failure, and what we can do as parents, educators, and community leaders to encourage our children to run their own race. So I am, however, before we get into a specific conversation about perfectionism, I want to talk a little bit about parenting in the 21st century. And sort of just lay the foundation for the conversation that we're going to have. So here's the easy part when it comes to parenting. How you raise a well-adjusted adult is the same way as how you raise a confident adult, which is the same way as how you raise a self-reliant adult. So we don't have to look at different ways of raising our children in order to get a child that moves into their adult world, well-adjusted, confident, and self-reliant, and civil. It's the doing of it that's the hard part. And so my husband and I raised an adult like this. We have a son who's 28, and I'll say without hedging here that we're over the moon proud of him. He's doing wonderfully, but more important than anything, we're proud of the individual that he is, the character that he has. Having said that, we are obviously proud of what he's doing in his life, but much more importantly, we're proud of who he is as a human being on this planet. So, you know, I am singing his praises, and I will say that my husband and I tried really hard to apply all that we're going to talk about tonight. And we failed epically on many occasions. So I want you to know that it's okay to fail as a parent at times. And everything we're going to talk about tonight, you want to understand that you're allowed to be imperfect as a parent, just as your children are allowed to be imperfect. And failure is an important part of what we do with our children. So, you know, I still wake up sometimes in the middle of the night with a sweat, thinking back on these moments where I lost my cool, I overreacted, I underreacted, I overcontrolled. Maybe I wrote a paper or two for my kid when I really shouldn't have. So I just want you to know that I'm come to the table tonight, understanding your plight, and also having gone through it myself and done it imperfectly, and still came out with a son who's relatively well-adjusted. I would always say to my son that I have 2 funds for you. I have a college fund and I have a therapy fund. And when you're ready to go to therapy and deal with all the issues that I passed on to you, that we call it in psychology intergenerational transfer, I'll pay for it, and I'll sit there and listen to it too, and I'll take responsibility for the fact that that I passed some things on that may have made your life a little bit difficult. Okay, so so before we get into the nitty-gritty of talking about perfectionism, I also want to let you know that raising our son the way that we did, which is the way that I'm going to suggest that you raise your children tonight, is a monumental task. And it's also can be a very challenging task in relation to your peers and to the school system and to your community. And what I mean by that is there are going to be things that I recommend you do tonight that are going to run counter to what you've heard you should be doing in raising your kids. And you may be judged for that. You may be discriminated against for that. And it's not an easy task to have the courage to raise children in the way that I'm going to recommend tonight, because it is really counter to what our culture suggests is important. And we did it that way, and we survived, and you guys will too. So, okay. So the challenge that I want to lay out to you tonight, because my job is to rattle your cage a little bit, and the challenge for you is to consider a philosophical shift in how you're parenting and to talk about specific things that you can do differently to support that shift. And I don't have all the answers, but I think I have some important pieces to the puzzle. So we're going to cover first how we parent in the 21st century, and then how that parenting is affecting our children and what we can do about it. All right, so how do we parent in the 21st century? We are parenting desperately, as if our children's lives are a predetermined obstacle course. And our job as parents is to get our kids not just to the finish line, but to come in the top 3. All right, even if we have to run the race for them and at our own expense. All right, so specifically, we parent desperately in 3 different ways. We parent from a place of desperate love. So what do we all want desperately for our kids? We want our kids to feel loved, to be safe, secure, and happy. And we have very little tolerance for our children's discomfort. So their struggle, their disappointment, their unhappiness, and their failure. And that is why I call our love for them desperate. We're desperate for them to be happy so that we can be okay, all right? So not only so they can be happy, but also so that we can feel okay. We also parent from a place of desperate fear. All right, hold on, I'm just turning my page here. And here are some examples of the kind of fear that we're parenting from. That our kids won't be successful without significant involvement on our part, that they can't do it themselves, whatever it is, and that failure is not an option. So instead of preparing our children for life, we're actually protecting them from life. And then finally, and this one is a hard one to hear, and this is something that we all do as parents because we're human, we parent from a place of desperate ego. So our kids' success and or their failure has become a measure of our own success and our self-worth. So what has happened is we've turned parenting into a competitive sport where we involve ourselves in our children's lives like we're the ones who's trying to be the elementary school child that gets the stars, the best foxtrotter at the middle school dance, the captain of the football team, the one getting into the Ivy League school and graduating with a job in New York City, making $120,000 their first year, okay? So we hold on tight, over-involving ourselves in their lives instead of learning to let go, and let go without losing control. And it hasn't always been this way. So if you're a baby boomer, you know that firsthand. So instead of having over-involved parents, our parents were under-involved. That wasn't always good either, all right? They were not really paying a lot of attention to our emotional well-being or our emotional selves. And so I am not romanticizing my upbringing. I'm a baby boomer myself. But what I am saying is that some aspects of the parenting that we went through actually helped us build up the grit and resilience that we needed to transition into adulthood and to figure ourselves out in some way, shape, or form. All right. Okay. So as hyper-attentive parents, we're stealing opportunities from our kids, and in the process, we're handicapping a generation of young adults. And we're all part of the problem. And that's me included. As I said earlier, I participated in that as hard as I tried not to, and as aware as I was. It's very challenging not to be a part of it at some level. So I hovered a little too much at times. I took some struggles out of my son's life when I shouldn't have. And I did a little too much for him sometimes. So do you think I overcompensated for my hard knocks upbringing? And the answer is, yeah, I did. And so are all of you, and we all are to some degree. So when we overparent too much and too often, here's the issue. We communicate to our kids that they're not capable and that they cannot survive without us. And by the way, when we underparent too much or too often, you communicate to your kids that your needs and or your wants are more important than theirs. So neither message paves a very good road for self-reliance, confidence, and independence. You're going to mess your kids up in some way, and that's okay, as long as you parent them in a way that they feel capable of handling life. That's the key. We want our kids, when they step out in the world, we want them to have a fundamental belief system that they can handle it, even if it's going to be ugly, even if it's not going to turn out great all the time. And even when they're going to thrive, we want them to know that, hey, you can handle it. Whatever comes your way, you're equipped for that. Okay. So the reality is that often what happens in this day and age is that our kids look really accomplished on paper, but they can't make it on their own. And believe me, they know it, and they pick up on this at very early ages. And how do you think that makes them feel? Does it make them feel strong and powerful and capable and confident and fearless? Well, they don't. No, they feel dependent. They feel incapable. They feel scared. They feel anxious. They feel angry. I see these kids on my couch often, and they're angry at the tail end of this journey of their childhood. They're frustrated and angry with the fact that they don't feel like they can handle their own lives. They feel entitled. They feel depressed. They feel fooled and cheated, right? In fact, according to the Pew Research Survey, millennials are individuals born between 1980 and the year 2000, think less of themselves and more critical of themselves than all generations going back to 1934. And this is a generation of now adults who think less of themselves than many previous generations. So, okay. And then finally, what about us? What about us, right? We're stressed out. I know you're stressed out. You're not sure exactly how hard to push. You're not sure how to support your children. You're not sure how to let go and let them fail. It's scary. So we're stressed out. We're exhausted, confused, anxious, depressed. And certainly through this COVID experience and this chronic uncertainty that we've all gone through collectively as a human race, all of those, everything I'm talking about preceded COVID, and COVID came and really placed everything on steroids. So when I was writing this talk, I sat back and I thought to myself, well, wait a second. I felt angry, and I said to myself, well, what the hell? What are we as parents supposed to do? It's not just us, right? It's not just us. We're not the ones that we're reacting to pressures ourselves. So there are expectations that are being placed on us as parents and our children that are coming from society, from schools, from colleges, from government, and from other parents. So how do we let go if the risk is that our children are going to fall behind and ultimately maybe fail in life and be unhappy, right? So this requires a different way of thinking about what our role is in our children's lives. What is our parental responsibility? So our fundamental responsibility is not to make sure that Johnny gets an A in AP Bio. That's not our job. Our fundamental responsibility is to make sure that when Johnny fails a test in AP Bio, he knows he can handle it. And he knows that he can reach out for help. And he knows that he can learn to get through it. It is our responsibility that Susie knows that she doesn't have to be perfect to be successful and happy in life, and that Jimmy can solve his own problems and make his own decisions. And that Mary knows that getting to know yourself takes a lifetime. And just because she doesn't know what she wants to do at 16, she's going to be okay. And finally, that Sammy knows that he's worthy of love, no matter what, because love and connection is what makes the world go round. So in order to accomplish this shift, we have to have the courage to let go of some control and some responsibility. And believe it or not, that actually starts at conception. So in other words, who your children are and what they do and how they do it are not about you. It's about them. Your job is to create an incubator for them to start the process of getting to know themselves, of creating their voice in the world, not to decide for them who they need to be or should be, and then push them in that direction. All right. So once again, to reiterate, your job is to create a structured environment where a child can bang around. They can make mistakes. They can experiment. They can get to know themselves. They can understand what their strengths and weaknesses are. Your job is not to place expectations on them that are developmentally inappropriate, that create an enormous amount of stress and anxiety in their lives to the point where they can't function. The kind of pressure that causes them to feel like they have to be perfect in order to be worthy of love and success. Okay, so let's now start to talk about perfectionism. And what I want to start with is I want to start talking about what perfectionism actually is so that we are all coming from the same place. So I'm going to give you a simple definition first. The root of perfectionism is believing that your self-worth is based on your achievements, right? Achievements like your grades, your athletic prowess, your looks, your public awards and recognition, the school you go to, the college that you get into, the number of friends you have, the number of likes you get. Okay, so perfectionism is actually a belief system about how the world works. And the belief system goes like this: if I am not perfect, I will not be lovable, respected, successful, etc., etc. This is the belief system that we are unwittingly teaching our children. And we've seen over the course of the last 20 years, the level of anxiety go up exponentially in our children's lives. They self-report, and we're going to talk about the causes of this as I see them anyway. And we'll get into more detail about the effect it has on the kids. So we know that this definition of perfectionism, when you hear it, you're like, okay, well, that's ridiculous, because we all know that we're flawed. And if you look back on your lives and your childhood, you could see, you could write down a million different examples of failures that you experienced and mistakes that you made. And here you all are on this call tonight, surviving and doing the best you can and hopefully thriving in important aspects of your life. So it's not rational. Perfectionism is not rational. And it's also not achievable. And here is what perfectionists do. When we have this belief system, what we do is we establish a bar for ourselves that is unrealistic. And then we work as hard as we can to reach that bar. So here's what happens. If we don't get to the bar, then we evaluate ourselves as not being good enough. If we actually accomplish the goal that we set for ourselves, what do? We raise the bar. We don't get to enjoy. If you function under a perfectionistic belief system, you never actually get to have a moment where you feel like you're enough. you either miss the bar and you're not enough, or you meet the bar and you come to the conclusion that the bar must not have been high enough. And so you raise it, okay? So there are actually 3 types of perfectionism, and they all exist on a continuum, by the way. So meaning that somebody could be extremely perfectionistic and somebody could be slightly perfectionistic, okay? Most people fall somewhere in the middle, which is a relatively healthy place to be. In this day and age, we're seeing so many more of these kids with the much more extreme belief systems affecting their mental health and their engagement in life. All right, so the 3 definitions of 3 different types of perfectionism. And you can have all 3. You can have the trifecta, so they don't exist exclusive from one another. One is a self-oriented form of perfectionism, and that is that you place an irrational desire to be perfect on yourself. All right, self-oriented. Another is an other-oriented, and that's when you place unrealistic standards of perfection on other individuals. So, and we're seeing these exponentially in our world, in our adult world as well. All you have to do is go on social media for a New York second, and you can pick out a million examples of people judging other individuals for not being good enough and people judging themselves for not being good enough. And then finally, the 3rd type of perfectionism is a socially prescribed perfectionism. So perceiving that excessive expectations of perfection from other individuals. So let me say that another way to be clear. The socially prescribed form of perfectionism is a belief system that other people expect me to be perfect. Okay? So, in its extreme form, perfectionism can be toxic, and those individuals desire success, yet are more focused on avoiding failure. So this is a really, really super important point to get. Because you're going to start to make connections between what I'm saying and your children's behavior. So once again, those individuals who adhere to this belief system at a toxic level desire success, right? Yet they're focused on and motivated instead to avoid failure. This means that their motivation is coming from a negative place. And you may end up having a child who is really driven, but also very avoidant. And that would be an example of a situation where they're being motivated from a place of fear. Maybe the fear is enough that they avoid something. Maybe the fear is enough that they try so hard that they actually suffer significantly for the efforts that they make in a way that is deleterious to their own wellness, physical, emotional, cognitive wellness. So individuals that are perfectionistic are not striving for excellence. Instead, and they may appear to be striving for excellence, but instead they're motivated to perform in order to avoid failure. I saw this in my town when my son was coming up. You saw the kids that were being pushed. They were being pushed really hard to perform. They were being pushed to be at the top of the class, to be the captain of this, to take over this, to write a manifesto by the time they're 4.5 years old. And on the outside, these kids often looked phenomenal because they were bright and they were following through and they were organized and they seemed to have their priorities in place. So many of those kids, once they were through their high school years and moved on to their college years, faltered because they couldn't sustain being motivated from a place of fear instead of from a place of self-respect and a place of belief in themselves. And you saw these kids come home. You saw these kids falter their first year of college. You saw them come home. You saw them maybe get into some trouble. And it was always a shock. It was like, oh my God, Stevie? I can't believe Stevie. I mean, he he graduated in the top 5 of his class, and he was an amazing kid, and he played the tuba, and he was the captain of the football team, and he was so kind and lovely human being. Well, poor Stevie had been living a life of quiet desperation, trying to stay up to speed with all the expectations that were being placed on him. And he hit critical mass and couldn't handle it anymore, okay? So what are the kinds of behavior that are typically associated with being a perfectionist? You're critical of yourself, all right? So you'll hear children be very critical, in fact, to the point of sounding like self-hatred, and often critical of others as well. Having unrealistic expectations, and excessive concern around making mistakes or failing. These kids tend to have significant amounts of self-doubt, and they'll hide it oftentimes. The girls maybe not as much as the boys. Believing that others should be perfect and you can't be okay unless things are perfect. So one of the things that I talk to my kids about in my practice is they'll express that they're struggling with something, and I'll suggest to them that you can struggle like that and still be okay. Just because you're uncomfortable, just because you're struggling right now, does not mean that you're not okay, all right? Oftentimes these individuals will project an image of flawlessness because failure is their kryptonite. And there'll be a refusal to acknowledge the fact that they're imperfect, right? So these are just an example of some of the kinds of things that you might be seeing in a child who's coming from that belief system. So perfectionism has always been around, but according to the research that was published in the Psychological Bulletin back in 2016, which looked at generational differences in perfectionism over the past 3 decades, listen to this, between 1989 and 2005, young people's desire to be flawless has skyrocketed. And this is with no regards for gender, socioeconomic status, or the culture that those children are growing up in. The statistics are alarming. So now I'm going to break down those 3 types of perfectionism and let you know how much they've increased over the course of the last 15, 20 years. The self-oriented type, we saw an increase of 10%. The other-oriented type, where you expect others to be perfect, has increased 15%. The socially prescribed perfectionism, where children, generations of children now, feel like other people need them to be perfect, expect them to be perfect, has increased 33%. 33%. Now, this matches very nicely with increases in anxiety, increases in suicidal ideation, increases in depression, all right? So young people get the message very early on that they must compete with each other in order to meet societal pressures to succeed, and that they feel that perfectionism is necessary in order to feel safe, socially connected, and to have self-worth. Okay, so what I want to do now is talk about what creates this culture of perfectionism. And I'm going to look at it from multiple perspectives because we're not entirely sure why we've seen such a significant increase. But we know that our childhood experiences and the messages that they're getting likely play a pretty large role. All right, so here are some possibilities, some categories of influence. One is there's a possible biological component to perfectionism, and we need to address that first and just understand that there are some mental health conditions that can actually result in a perfectionistic way of approaching things. And you may have a child like this. You may have a child that was born with tendencies to be a perfectionist. Oftentimes that biological component comes out or is evidenced over the course of that child's life through things that we can see, like an eating disorder, or OCD. All right, so those are two conditions that can be genetically based and can also come along with that perfectionistic tendency. We have also, over the years, become very accustomed to having unrealistic expectations that are developmentally inappropriate and downright unachievable for our children. And there's a whole history that I don't have time to go into tonight. It's fascinating, though, about it all started with Adam Walsh's son being kidnapped and murdered, and there was a movie that was made in our country, and over 3 million baby boomers saw this movie and got the feeling like the world wasn't a safe place. We can't let our kids out. And then other things followed, in addition to a report coming out of the federal government that suggested that our kids were falling behind academically and that we had to push, push, push. And all of this resulted in us raising expectations. So now we're at this ridiculous level of expectations on our children at very young ages. So we start getting serious about their academic development in preschool. And there's actually something called preschool, which I don't even know how old these kids are, but apparently you got to get your kids into a good preschool to prepare them for preschool so that they're prepared for elementary school, so that you can hire a consultant when they're in middle school to start getting them into a good college. And here's what we've done. We are now requiring things of our children at very early ages that they are literally not ready to do. And we're measuring them and coming to conclusions like, well, Johnny's not keeping up. Something must be wrong with Johnny. So now we're going to pull Johnny out of the classroom. We're going to give him special help. And, we're going to make sure that Johnny performs, because performance in a perfectionistic culture, performance is more important than character. And we're raising our kids to perform rather than to have the character they need. So here's the difference. When you raise a child to have character, you're raising a child who will choose to perform. When you raise a child to perform, you're raising a child that's at great risk for mental health issues and for failure and dropping out. All right. So, and I'll tell you, from raising a boy during this time and having done the research, and I have a talk I do on raising boys, the boys seem to be suffering significantly in this culture because they are just developmentally not as ready as girls are to take on the academic challenges and the social challenges that are being placed on their plates. And oftentimes they're judged for that. And we're seeing these kids starting to check out around 4th grade. By middle school, a lot of times, these boys that are struggling in very characteristic ways because they're being expected and have been expected to do things that they can't actually do yet, and they feel really crappy about themselves, they start to look for ways to self-medicate. So we're seeing an exponential increase in particularly in the use of marijuana. And that's a whole nother topic that's very important for all of you to educate yourself around. Another thing that we've seen culturally is this need to excessively praise our children, to recognize our kids. And this is coming directly out of the 1980s. Unfortunately, in my field in the 1980s, there was this whole self-esteem movement where we got trapped in this belief system that we could teach our children to feel good about themselves. We could make them feel good about themselves by telling them how great they are. Unfortunately, we can't do that. And what the kids know deep in their hearts is that they're getting all this praise. And a lot of times they don't deserve it. Maybe they haven't worked for it. They get praise, but you did half the work, or they didn't do any of the work, or they didn't do the work nearly up to par, and yet they're still getting some kind of praise or some kind of recognition. And they don't feel like they earned it, so they don't feel good about it. They also end up establishing expectations that is the motivation behind their effort. So their effort and motivation to do really well is to get praise. So what we call that in psychology is an external locus of control. And when you have an external locus of control, you're at the mercy of everybody and everything outside of you to make sure that you feel good about yourself. When you have an internal locus of control, you know that you can handle whatever comes your way and that you're going to make mistakes and that you're responsible. All right. So the difference, let's give you a really quick difference in interpreting a situation. Let's say that you have a teenager who has done very poorly on an exam. And if they have an external locus of control in that situation, and often many of them are going to have an external locus of control in this situation, they're going to blame the teacher. They're going to blame you. They're going to push things out. They're going to let go of their own responsibility. And they're going to say, oh, well, I would have done better if the teacher had done this, or if the teachers hadn't done all of that, or this or that, or if you hadn't taken me out to dinner that night, I could have been home studying. They'll come up with all kinds of reasons with that external locus of control for why they didn't do well. When you have an internal locus of control and something like you don't perform well, or something happens to you that you don't have any control over that is affecting you in a negative way, you take responsibility for it. So the first thing you do is you say, that doesn't feel good, that I didn't do well on that exam. I feel like I studied really hard and I was prepared, or maybe, gosh, I know I didn't really study as hard as I could have. Next time I'm going to do things differently. So that is an example of an internal locus of control. You want to raise your children to have an internal locus of control. Because if they do, they're going to have much more grit and resilience when it comes to getting through this crazy mixed up world that we live in. All right. And ultimately, it is a competitive world. And when they have an internal locus of control, they're going to be much better at competing, and competing in a way that's meaningful to them. Okay. So excessive praise and recognition. Being measured and compared is another thing that we have done. Since this report came out from the federal government, we are now standardized examining our kids. We're putting our kids into hierarchies. We're putting different kids in different classes based on their intellectual abilities. We're measuring and comparing, and the kids know it. And they know it if they're coming out on top, and they know it if they're coming out on the bottom. And we're creating a competitive developmental environment where they learn that if you're not the best, then you're not good enough. So my challenge to all of you is to ask a question: what happened to average? Because I hate to dash your belief systems, but most of you are average. Most of us are average. It's just true. We've got a bell curve, and the great majority of individuals are somewhere in the middle. And then you have a very small minority on the far end, on that end, and on the other end. So you're saying, oh my God, what, you want me to raise a kid that's average? You want me to let my kid be average? Look, your kid is going to find their way. If you're creating a structure that's healthy, if you have healthy expectations of them, if you challenge them, support them, collaborate with them, they're going to get to know themselves and find their way. Okay. We're also raising kids in an adult world where they're constantly monitored, measured, compared, told what to do, told how to do it, and when to do it. So the expectations are to meet the adult ego needs, and the adult fears, our fears and our ego, in order to be enough. It's probably like 5 years ago. We got 12 teenagers together. We put them on a stage in Old Saybrook. We filled the auditorium with over 250 parents and grandparents. And we asked them questions. We asked them, what's life like for you? How are you feeling in your world? And they were brilliant. They were just, they schooled us, by the way. They totally schooled us. So this grandfather, he asks them, what is our job? And this young lady, she grabbed the microphone. She's like, oh, I got the answer to that. I can tell you what your job is. Your job is not to tell us who we're supposed to be or make us into somebody that's going to make you feel good about yourself. These were her words. She said, your job is to create an environment for us to figure out who we are, what's important to us. Your job is to pick us up and dust us off. Your job is to forgive us when we make mistakes. Your job is not to shame us when we fail. And there was silence in that auditorium because she nailed it. That is exactly what we need to be doing as parents and mentors and teachers and administrators in our kids' lives. Okay. The other thing that's influencing this culture of perfectionism is this way of looking at things as if they're black and white instead of shades of gray. So we talk about success and failure. We talk about right and wrong, pretty and ugly, smart and stupid, but we miss the nuance. We miss the gray, and the gray is where we live. And so you can imagine if you're being raised in a world that is black and white, it's a world that's based on judgment. You're not enough if you're on this side, and you're plenty when you're on the other. That's not a healthy world. That's not a healthy way of raising our children. Okay. All right, let me check before I go on, let me just check my time and make sure we're looking good here. So we are also raising our children in a world that is relatively rigid. So mistakes are often harshly punished. And I see that. I saw it in my kids' class. It happened to my son when he was on the lacrosse team, and he happened to be at a party one night. He actually left the party. He wasn't drinking. He was on the couch watching a movie with us, and he was suspended from 2 state-level championship games because he was at the party, right? So there's some harsh judgment going on, some harsh punishment going on, and we need to allow our kids to make some mistakes and to fail without the shame of that black and white reaction, those black and white consequences. The other thing that I see a lot of is parents that are either raising their children with a very authoritarian approach. So that's a very militaristic, it's my way or the highway. These are the rules. You're going to do it this way. And this is what you're going to do. And you're going to do it like this, right? Sometimes we have to parent that way. Sometimes that's appropriate to parent with an authoritarian approach. It's not healthy for that to be your go-to. It's not healthy for that to be the foundation for your relationship with your children. You're the authority. You're the boss. And they have to then please you. Oftentimes these kids grow up feeling really angry. They often have low self-esteem. They often hide mental health conditions, so depression and anxiety. And they often can't think for themselves and don't have a deep understanding of who they are and what makes them tick. The other way of parenting that I see these days is a very permissive type of parenting. So either it's a permissive indifferent parenting where you kind of just take a real laissez-faire, hands-off sort of approach to parenting. You let your kids figure things out all on their own without any structure or any involvement. And you're communicating to your kids that really, I'm busy over here, so you take care of your stuff, I'll take care of my stuff, and I'll meet you, I'll see you at dinner. And then the permissive indulgent parenting is the parenting style where my example for that is that you have a child who's been playing video games for the last 4 hours, and instead of going in and saying, hey, it's really time for you to get off of the gaming system, you say, hey, can I get you a pizza so that you can sit there and not get up for another couple of hours? So that it's a very indulgent type of parenting, a parenting where maybe you have expectations that you're going to be your kid's best friend, And you also have a fear that you're going to piss them off and they're not going to love you. So those are two unhealthy ways of parenting that I see manifesting in our culture. And instead, what you want to try to do is to have an authoritative parenting style, which means that you're always in charge as a parent. You never give up your authority as a parent, but you create a structure that's flexible. It's a structure that, once again, your children can bang around within and get to know themselves. That creates quality connection between you and your children that is going to help you sustain communication with them over the difficult developmental milestones that they're going to go through. Okay. The last few things that I want to mention is the influence of social media, which we cannot minimize. It is having a significant deleterious effect on our kids' social development and their emotional development. And there is no good answer for this issue. All I have to say about that is that I strongly encourage you to delay giving your child a phone as long as is humanly possible. And I know how difficult this is. I have a lot of supplemental information that I can provide to your organizers so that they can get it out to you. One of which is I'm going to call it a contract, but it's really just it's a guide for navigating a communication and conversation with your child around the limits of social media in their lives and the limits of their phone. So I have a whole talk on technology and kind of how to handle that and what the decisions are that we're making now and how they're influencing our kids' development. But just know, and I know you're experiencing it, it's an impossible situation and one that we're going to have to push against in a very difficult way in order to get a handle around in the interest of our kids' wellness. Okay. So what I'm going to do right now with the time that we have left is I am going to, so when I wrote this talk, I thought to myself, well, I got to give these guys some guidelines, like something that they can do that is going to push against these
perfectionistic messages that we're all getting, not just our children, but all of us are getting. And so here's what I did. I put together 14 core messages that we need to find ways to communicate to our children, support in our children, to counterbalance this climate of perfectionism, because we're not going to change it on our own as parents. And our kids are going to be influenced, even if we're doing the best we possibly can not to have these expectations on them, because they're going to get them from other places as well. So we have to try to counterbalance all of this madness in some way to develop an alternative belief system and help our children do the same so that they can be healthier in their lives. Okay, so I'm just going to go through those 14 core messages, and I have all of these. I'll provide them to you so that you have them. You can use them in any way that you see fit. I share all of my intellectual capital. My name doesn't have to be on it. I don't care. Just use it, pass it around. Let's get some kind of revolution going here. Okay, so the first thing that I want to say is that the first message is that suffering is a normal part of life. So there's a difference between stress and anxiety. And unfortunately, we have started to use the term anxiety to refer to stress. And in the process of doing that, we have convinced a generation of kids and parents that feeling uncomfortable is a mental health condition. Okay, so we need to work with our children, help them understand that when they're suffering, it doesn't mean that they're not okay, that it's actually a normal part of life and an important part of life, because it's one of the fundamental ways that we get a message that something needs to be looked at, something needs to be addressed, a decision needs to be made, We need to approach a situation differently than we had. So if we try to avoid suffering or deny it or get stuck in it or take it away from our kids, we're not going to grow and they're not going to grow. We need to embrace it as normal. And then we need to learn how to balance it out with moments of joy. Okay. And that's something else that we need to put some efforts in with our kids. Got to start having some fun. All right. Some silly, pointless fun. Okay. Here's another one, another message. Connection with others is the most powerful antidote to human suffering. So if we're looking for the most powerful antidote to our suffering, it's human connection. Being on social media is not true, meaningful, lasting connection. It does not feed us. And we need to be fed. That's one of the things that made this pandemic so traumatic, was that we lost that physical, face-to-face, present connection with other human beings. In fact, all of the research suggests that when you have that kind of connection in your life, real connection in your life, you're physically healthier. You're much stronger and more robust in the face of adversity. You heal quicker. So they've done research on individuals that have had open heart surgery. And I don't know how they did that because it's not ethical. So that, I don't know, they must have had some of those patients that were just naturally isolated and others that were very socially engaged and got back into life very quickly. And those individuals actually healed faster and ultimately over the course lived longer. So we need to get back to some basic human connection and turn our screens off. And I say this as we're all on our screens, but the beauty of this is that you guys can be here and you may not have been able to be here if it was in person. All right, here's another one. People, we told our son this when he was in college. We said, people are faking confidence, because real confidence is not knowing how to do something, but simply having the courage to believe that you can figure it out. All right, so we all fake confidence. And my husband and I wrote my son a letter when he was in college. This is one of the things we told him that we wish we knew. We wish we knew that we weren't the only ones that were feeling like we didn't know what we were doing. And instead, that everybody doesn't feel like they know what they're doing most of the time. And instead, we just go and we do it. We try. And sometimes it's not pretty, but we try again and we try again. So the point being, we need to teach our children that confidence is available to you now. You don't have to wait to be good at something in order to be confident. You just have to believe that you can figure it out, right? You always have a choice. This is another really important message to teach our children. So your life is going to take unexpected turns, and some of those are going to be good and bad. Your responsibility for life's outcomes, whether you choose or not. So you might as well take charge. So I'll tell you a really quick anecdote around this. There's this guy, he has since passed away. He passed away a couple of years ago. His name was Travis Roy, and he wanted nothing other than to play ice hockey for BU. And he got on the team. He got on the ice his freshman year, and literally 10 seconds on the ice, he got smashed up against the boards and paralyzed from the neck down. Everything he'd worked for during his childhood, gone in a New York minute. He was speaking at Conn College, and I went and saw him speak, and he said something profound. He said, sometimes you pick your challenges, and sometimes they pick you. But it doesn't matter, because you always have a choice. No one can ever take your choice, the power of choice away. We need to teach our children that level of responsibility and that level of confidence, that they have the power to choose, and they can choose and make a wrong choice, and they can adjust. And sometimes things are going to happen to them that they didn't have anything to do with, and they still have a responsibility to make choices. Okay. The next one is something that my dad said to me while I was growing up. My father was an admiral in the Navy, and I said early in the talk, I grew up really hard knocks. And he said to me, Alicia, he said, run your own race. He said, don't settle for what other people think of you. Work hard to know what your strengths and weaknesses are. Know your values, know your goals, and then apply everything you got to what you want. Take responsibility for yourself, right? So I want to see a generation of kids that have been raised to believe that they can run their own race. All right, we've got to work on that with our kids. We don't have to run everyone races, and it's hard to run your own race. It was hard as parents. My husband and I had a hard time running our own race with our son, but we believed so desperately in raising a child that had character instead of a child that was going to perform, that we felt the responsibility. We had to run our own race in the culture that we were raising him in. The same is true in our personal lives. We do our best not to get trapped in the group think. And this is what happens on social media. We get trapped in the group think, and we think that the group knows what's right. Take a step out. Maybe they do, and maybe they don't. And maybe what's right for that group is not right for you as an individual, or for you as a parent, or is not right for your child. Okay? Think for yourself. Take the time to think for yourself. It takes energy to do that. It takes research to do that. It takes courage. And we need to start doing that to get back to some sanity. Learning, as an adjunct to that, learning to define what a successful life is for yourself. So you don't get to decide that for your children. You don't get to decide what success means for them. They get to decide as they move into adulthood what they want their life to be, what success looks like for them. Let them start working on that around issues that are benign at very, very early ages. Encourage them to think for themselves and make decisions for themselves, initially around things that don't have very, very big consequences. And then as they start to age and move into their teen years and their early adulthood years, and the consequences of their choices become a little more important, they'll have the fundamental skills to tackle their lives. Okay, bringing your expectations back to the real world. I'm going to suggest right now that you lower your expectations. Lower your expectations of your kids. Now you're going to say, well, that's a scary thing, because what am I going to raise a mediocre child? Here's what the research tells us. When we lower our expectations in appropriate situations, our performance goes up. Okay? So here's what's happening this year with our kids. We thought, oh, finally we're going to get back to school and the COVID thing, and then we'll get, all this is going to be past us. It hasn't been. We all have experienced that. But in addition to that, what has happened is the kids are back in school and the expectations have gone back up again. So maybe they were relatively more reasonable during the heart of COVID because it was just such a difficult situation for everybody to monitor. And now what we're seeing is these kids are coming back to these expectations that they are literally ill-equipped to handle emotionally. They're depleted cognitively. They're not prepared for. They're behind academically. And we need to pay attention to their emotions as much as we're paying attention to their performance. And sometimes maybe pay more attention to how your children are managing emotionally versus how they're doing academically, okay? So use fear as a tailwind. So we want to teach our children that fear can feel like a headwind. It can come at you and hold you back. When you can find your confidence and fake it, you can use fear as a tailwind. You can actually use it as a way of motivating yourself. And so accept that fear is normal and that at times you're going to make mistakes and fail and it's not going to feel good, and believe that you can handle pain, struggle, stress, anxiety, fear, failure, missteps, and that they pass. They always pass. Okay. And there's just a couple more and then I'm going to stop and we're going to open things up for questions. Stay flexible in the face of adversity and embrace that change is inevitable. So this is a concept that we want to work on with our children. So when we become too rigid, we lose power, we lose resilience and grit, and the ability to bend without breaking. So we want to raise children that can move in the wind the way that a tree moves in the wind. And when you go up to a tree and you hug it, you punch it, you touch it, you kick it, it doesn't appear like it moves. But if it didn't actually, if it couldn't move, when the wind blew, it would fall over. So we want to teach our children to try their best to stay flexible. Some kids, you know, we come into this world with a temperament. It's genetic. Some kids are going to be rigid by nature. And as parents, we're going to struggle to help that child understand the importance of flexibility. Other kids are going to be naturally flexible. All right. So we're going to always work with our children's temperament. We get to know our children separate and apart from us. They are individuals from the day they're conceived. They're separate and apart from us. And our job is to get to know them, right? And then build that safe structure for them to bang around. Okay. All right, I had a few more on the on here, and I think I'm going to stop now. I'm just going to mention forgiveness as being critically important, forgiving yourself and forgiving others, and then finally finding ways to laugh during challenging times. So finding your sense of humor and finding ways to laugh about life, even during traumatic times like we've all been through in the last 3 years. So I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much for listening to everything I had to say. We're going to open it up for questions, and let's see what you guys are thinking.
So if anyone has any questions, you can use the Q&A box, and then we'll be able to see that. I think I'll start with my own question. The importance of kind of talking about our kids when they mess up. Like, I think people are very protective about their kids' stumbles, and sometimes opening up about those stumbles can be really liberating. Can you talk a little bit about that? I think that's us projecting our own stuff, right?
Yeah, so that's so important. If we feel shame around our children's missteps, they're most definitely going to feel shame around their missteps. So like you're saying, it's very important if our kids have a misstep to talk about it openly as if it's normal, and to make sure that our children know that it's just all part of being human. And also another thing that you can do is to talk about your own missteps with your children. They love to hear about our imperfections because our children think we're perfect, believe it or not, and they want to please us, and they have us on pedestals even when they're not acting like they do. And sometimes it's very powerful for them to hear us talk about some of the difficulties that we're having in our lives. The other thing you can do in a conversation like that, age appropriately, is to ask for your children's advice. Give them some agency in your own life. So you might say at the dinner table, gosh, I have this difficult situation at work with this one person, and I feel sometimes like I'm being judgmental in my head, and I'm really trying not to because I know they're going through a really hard time in their lives, but I'm losing my patience. do you guys have any ideas on how I might be able to manage those feelings, or how I might be able to talk to that coworker about this situation or that situation? And even if they just say, well, no, I mean, we don't know what to do. Why are you asking us? That's okay. Just throw it out there. And if they give you advice, don't judge it. Don't criticize it like, oh, that wouldn't work, or I could never do that, or that's not a good idea because of this. And you use it as some kind of teaching moment. Instead, you just say, wow, that's interesting. I'll think about that. I really appreciate your advice. So taking the shame out of being human.
That's great. We have a question here about that says, such a great talk. Thank you. How can we advocate for some of these changes within schools?
Yeah, so this is challenging because well, let me just say this first. I feel so bad for these schools because there is a lot of responsibility that's been heaped on the teachers and the administrators and the counselors at school to raise your children, and not necessarily coming directly from you. Sometimes it's coming directly from the parents, but and they're under a lot of pressure to make sure that your children perform for lots of different reasons. And one of the ways that you can advocate for more reasonable expectations is to adjust your own expectations first, okay? And then communicate with your child's teacher, with your child's guidance counselor, have conversations, go in and have conversations with the principal if it's appropriate, and start to talk about these issues openly and in relation to your child. Like, these are my expectations, and this is how I'm parenting my child at home. How does that dovetail with the social and emotional learning that you're doing in the classroom, and what your expectations are of my child? So having those kinds of frank conversations to try to bring things in alignment. Believe it or not, what I hear from the teachers a lot is that the parents are expecting too much, and that they would like to see the parents back off on their expectations. So maybe as a parent, you might step into those conversations with your teachers to find out if that's actually the case, and they can help support and give you permission to take a step back. If, let's say that you're having, let's say that you have a child who's not doing their work independently at home, not following through on certain things, maybe they're not very organized, and you've been too involved in supporting the child, and you feel like you're enabling the kid, and you're going to start to take a step back. You could let the teacher know that you're doing that, so that they know that, hey, guess what? This is what I'm doing at home. So you may see my child's performance change in the short term, because I'm giving them some responsibility that they may not know what to do with. And I would appreciate your support around that. So teaming up in those ways is what I would suggest that you do.
And that kind of builds on another question that a parent had about the academic pressure that can feel developmentally inappropriate. So in this example, this parent is saying that our child is they're being told that their child is quote unquote behind and needs extra help, even though the family feels that the child isn't truly behind. Is there a way to advocate?
Yeah, this is important. Just because the school system feels like your child is behind doesn't mean they are. And if your feeling is that the child is doing just fine where they are, and you'd like to take a step back for another couple months and just keep an eye on things, that is your prerogative. You need to communicate that to the school. So I had a similar situation when my son was in elementary school, and we had just moved up to Connecticut from Fairfax County, and they said that my son was behind in his reading and he might have some learning issues or whatever. And I'm like, you know, he might be behind in terms of your curriculum, but I think, I think maybe with a little additional support, he's going to be just fine. And they would recommend testing and all this kind of stuff. I said, no, it's not okay. I don't agree with that. I say we work with him. I'm going to work with him at home and we pair up and we do well, here's what happened. He was perfectly fine. And with a little bit of help, he got his performance up to a reasonable level. And fast forward, my son's in college, and I got a letter in the mail from his elementary school teacher. And she said to me, Alicia, I just reflect back on when you advocated for your son. And I just wanted to tell you, you were so right. And good for you for not allowing us to bring him into the system in a way that you felt was inappropriate at his developmental level, and having courage to let him develop and see where it took him. So that is a very personal decision for you to make with your child's teachers. But just know that you have the right to say, I'm not comfortable with that yet. Let's do a little bit of this and a little bit of that before we take the next step and see what happens.
Great, thank you. This question is, how do we know when to seek extra help outside the home for our child's perfectionism or depression or trouble managing big feelings?
Yeah, good question. Okay, so here's what you want to look for. You want to look for a pattern of dysregulation that doesn't come and go, all right? So what happens when a child is struggling and their mental health is enough of an issue that they need some professional care. You want to see that they are consistent, relatively consistent in their struggles for a period of 3 to 6 months. It used to be, I used to say 6 months, but now with COVID, it's more like 3 months because everything is truncated. So if you have a child that seems to be dysregulating now and then, but they seem to recover and get back to baseline over time, I would say, read some books and maybe have a consultation yourself with a professional to see what you can do as a parent to support that child at home. And if you have a child who is so anxious that they're refusing to go to school on a frequent basis, they can't eat, they're regressing emotionally. So maybe they're 12 years old and they're acting like they're 6 years old. They're behaving in ways they don't normally. They're yelling, they're losing their temper, they're having difficulty sleeping, eating, they have nervous tics, they're isolating themselves. And those kinds of symptoms are persisting consistently over that 3 to 6 months. Then you want to get a professional involved. But here's the thing. What we can do in our offices with these kids is limited. So what I recommend you do as a parent is find someone who will work with you first. So you go in, you talk to them, you do some troubleshooting, they teach you some tools, and you go home and you adjust your parenting of that child and see the influence that might have before you bring the child into the office themselves. Okay, not that it's a bad thing to bring a child to therapy, not at all. But oftentimes you can waylay them having to sit on a therapist's couch by learning some different tools yourself. And I'll just add to that real quick, because this is important. Oftentimes when a child is dysregulating consistently, it's a reflection that there's something going on in their environment that is making them feel unsafe in some way, all right? So the very first thing you do when you have a child that's struggling is you look at yourself. You look at your relationship with your significant other. You check with the school and see if anything has happened at school or in the classroom or how your child is doing there. You look at whether or not there's been other extended family familial issues. Are they having some sibling issues? is the structure of your life, has it been disrupted? Now, chances are during COVID, all of these things are true. Because there's probably not one marriage that isn't struggling. There probably is not one structured environment that hasn't gone upside down. So of course, we're going to see that our children are struggling during a time like this. Your kids are going to be reactive to the structure that they're living in, whether that structure is at home or at school or in their community or with their peers. So look there first, make adjustments there first, give your child time to sort of, readjust and see what shakes out.
Great advice. Another parent, thank you for such a great talk. How can I support a child who is so nervous to get a B or fail, even though he never has? I've told him I was a C and B student, so truly it's no pressure for me. He just puts it on himself.
Yeah. I always get this question because there's always these kids that, that some kids just put the pressure on themselves, and they're hard kids to parent around these issues because they kind of come to this naturally. It's a big question. We don't have time to go into lots of detail. This is what I would encourage you to do, however. What you want to work on with a child like that is the importance of being perfectly imperfect, because that's something that sometimes when you're a perfectionist by nature, you can grasp the concept of being perfectly imperfect because it feels okay. And it's a concept that, most kids, young kids aren't going to be able to comprehend when you say it to them that way. So what you want to do is you want to positively reinforce imperfection with that child. And it sounds like the dialogue is already in play in this family, and that's great. You're giving, that parent is giving that child permission to let go of that stress and anxiety. Now, you might do everything that is humanly possible to convince that child, and they still are going to hold on to this belief system. So the other thing that you want to do is you want to work on helping that child understand the connection between their choices and how they feel. All right? So when they make a choice to put too much pressure on themselves, and that means then that they can't sleep, or it means that their stomach is upset, help them make that connection. And as that child matures, you want to then start to talk about the fact that they're responsible. They're responsible for making this choice that led to how they felt. And that they can change this choice and they'll feel differently. Because they're going to need to understand that connection with that perfectionistic tendency in order to be healthy as an adult. Okay.
Right. And our last question, I think you have done a whole session on this for us, is how can I find out what's going on inside my 16-year-old son's head?
Good luck. All right, so you can't. Let's just start there. It's very normal and natural for a 16-year-old boy not to share what's going on inside his head. And so I know what the real question is. The real question is, how do I tolerate the fear and the discomfort of not knowing what's going on and feeling like maybe something is going on that I'm missing because that young man is isolating themselves in their room, won't engage in meaningful conversations with you, shows up for dinner, doesn't say anything, gets out of there as quickly as they possibly can. So how do you distinguish between typical adolescent behavior, right, and some mental health issue that may be going on that you're missing, or something that they may be feeling that would be healthy for them to talk about? So understand something first, and that is that there is a chemical called oxytocin. And oxytocin is a chemical that is released when we get stressed and when we experience anxiety. And it's actually, it actually motivates us to connect to other people. So here's the thing with men and boys, they produce less oxytocin than females do when they get stressed and anxious. So what do boys and men tend to do when they're having feelings or they're having experiences that are difficult for them? They go inside, they isolate. They're not going to sit down necessarily and like a daughter might, or like a woman might. We're more programmed to actually connect when we're feeling that way. So that doesn't mean that you just hands off your son and okay, great, 16 years old, he's behaving like a 16-year-old. I'm just going to let him do what he wants to do and hope that he figures things out. So here's a few tips. Keep your conversations with your son short, and I mean short. So, and if you can have those conversations on the run, rather than don't sit your son down and look at him and try to get him to talk to you, because he's not going to do that. He's like, oh my God, that's too much. I can't handle it. So you want to have quick conversations. Don't ask a lot of questions. You want to have these conversations sitting side by side or walking side by side, if possible, and accept the fact that you're not going to get a lot of feedback from him, most likely. So you have to tolerate the discomfort around that. If you feel like there's been a significant change in your son's emotions, his demeanor, his behavior, then you want to take that seriously, and you do want to sit down and have a meaningful conversation with him. And it might be difficult and he may be uncomfortable, and that's going to have to be okay. But day to day, you want to tolerate the fact that his tendency is going to be to separate from you.
Great answer. Well, I think you're building a little Alicia Farrell fan club here in Trumbull, because this advice has just been so great. And we get lots of feedback every time you speak. So thank you. Someone just commented, thank you so much. There are a lot of people who would benefit from your talk. So the good news is we have a recording, and it will be up probably in about a week. It'll be on the TPOD website. We'll also have it on Trumbull Community Television, so you can send it to your friends or your spouse or your partner, or maybe your children's teacher, who knows. But this is all just such great information. So thank you, Dr. Farrell. Our next session of Let's Talk Mental Health Trumbull will be April 25th. That is a Monday, and we will have the Triangle Community Center is going to come in and talk to us a little bit about helping to support our LGBTQ community and supporting their wellness. So different topic, hopefully as engaged an audience. So thank you, Dr. Farrell. Thank you.
Thank you.
All our participants. This has been wonderful. We appreciate your time. If there's anything we can do, or you have any advice or suggestions, you'll be getting us an evaluations link to tell us what you thought and to give us ideas for future topics. So thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Farrell. Have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care, everyone. Bye.